And in 2008, after the election was completed, some of my friends in Atlanta happened to be sitting around a dinner table one night, and they got to thinking about the fact that as friends of mine, they were also friends of another guy from Virginia who had just been elected to the United States Senate. And so they called me up and said, look, you really need to get to know this guy named Mark Warner. Because we think that while he's a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're going to find y'all have an awful lot in common. And he's a good guy, we like him, you're a good guy, we like you, and we'd love for you guys to get to know each other well. Well, that happened, and Mark and I became good friends. I forgave him for going to George Washington to undergrad school and Harvard to law school. He wanted to get in UGA, but he couldn't get in, and I understood that. But he had been very successful in the business world. He actually was in Georgia in his early formative years, right after college. And as I talk about the fact, and he and I do a road show, we've done it around the country, literally, time and time again on our debt issue. He made his money in Georgia and took it to Virginia to spend it. Now, that's not literally the case, but he did start out in Georgia. Well, we did become good friends, as I said, and we had the opportunity from time to time to sit around and discuss issues that were important to us, which means there were issues that are important to the country. And in 2010, we were sitting on the Senate floor one night, and we got to talking about this issue that was staring all of us in the Senate in the face. And that is, at that time, a debt of somewhere in the range of $13 to $14 trillion. But yet nobody was paying attention to it. Everybody was more focused on getting reelected in the fall of 2010. So Mark and I decided that we'd put a group together, and we did, and the purpose of that group was to become educated on this issue of the debt and how we as policymakers and legislators should address that issue. Because the time to do it is now. It's the number one issue facing our country. And as we talked about it, we realized that because everybody else was focused on the election, that we really needed to almost shock the conscience of some members of the Senate about the fact of how serious this issue is. So we put a group together that ultimately became the Gang of Six. And Mark and I got to know each other a lot better in a lot more up close and personal way than either of us ever imagined we would. I spent more time with him over the last 2 years than I have my wife. And let me just tell you, this is a guy that just makes you proud to serve in the United States Senate. Because he is a man who, having been the governor of the state of Virginia, has addressed fiscal issues. He turned a deficit situation into a surplus situation in the years that he was governor of Virginia. So he knows how to do that. He's a guy who was very successful in the business world, and he brought that knowledge of the business community to the United States Senate. We need more people like that. And it's been a real genuine pleasure for me to have a chance to interact and react and to act with Mark Warner over the last 4 years that we've served together in the United States Senate. He's a guy that understands education. That's important to everybody here. He was governor at a time when the state of Virginia came to be known as the best state in the country to do business. So he's a guy that brings an awful lot to the table, but most importantly for me, he's my dear friend. And when you serve in public bodies like we do and you live in glass houses, it's nice to have good friends that on the other side of the aisle particularly, that you can interact with and have a great appreciation for their outlook on what we're doing, as well as interacting with you from the standpoint of encourage you, and in the tough times when you're a Republican, you have a Democrat to come over and say, hey, things are going to get better. That's what public service is all about, and that's what Mark Warner is all about. So it's indeed a privilege and a pleasure for me to introduce my dear friend and my colleague, Mark Warner, United States Senator from Virginia.
Thank you, Saxby. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, Saxby. Thank you for those comments. Thank you for your friendship, John. Thank you for giving Sax that introduction. Let me also thank Keith Mason for hosting or sponsoring this beginning of this lecture series. I think it was particularly appropriate, Saxby once again showing his commitment to this great university, that he managed to wait to make his announcement about not running on Friday so he could build the crowd here for Monday morning. This is his first public appearance since he's made that announcement, and I want to take a moment. We're going to change up the program a little bit. I'm not going to, you are going to have to endure my whole 45-minute PowerPoint presentation on the debt and deficit. You're not going to have to endure that. I'm going to talk a little while, then I want to have Sax and I come back up and try to take your questions. But I would have never thought, one of the things about politics, business life, is you never know where you're going to find your partner and your friend. Saxby and I are two very different people. He is the epitome of a Southern gentleman, courtly, calm, relaxed. The way he describes me each day is, well, Mark, did you take your Ritalin today? So this combination of friendship that grew up over about a shared passion about the future of our country, the issues around debt and deficit, has given me an insight not only into Saxby Chambliss, the elected official, but Saxby Chambliss, the individual. Because think about this for a moment, just to put this in some context. When we started the conversations, we started talking about this in the spring of 2010. Spring of 2010, when anger all across the country about some of the excesses at the federal government, the president was kind of at almost his bottom point. There was no rational political upside for a safe sitting Republican senator from a state like Georgia to be willing to step up with a Democrat and say, hey, we need to go out and tell the truth about the issue around the debt and deficit. A lot of things pass for what is called political courage in America today. This senator, this individual, this Georgian, this American, in my mind, is a true example of political courage. And Georgia, it will be Georgia's loss, and it is going to be America's loss that he's not going to continue to serve. That doesn't mean we don't have 2 more years to kick some tail up in Washington. But he has been someone who has been willing, at enormous, quote-unquote, political risk, to be willing to do something that should be the minimum expected of any of us that get hired, which is simply tell the truth about the facts. And I think while that has caused some consternation amongst some, I can assure you that there's no corner of America that Saxby Chambliss can't travel to today and not get tremendous support from people saying, thanks for what you're doing, thanks for what your effort is. Now, I think, frankly, as somebody who's been his partner in this, we need to have a higher standard than just thanks for your effort. We got to get stuff done. And I again want to come back to that. I want to give, though this was originally billed as a lecture about leadership in business, I want to make 3 quick points about that, and they all actually will reflect back on Saxby and kind of what we're grappling with. But from my experience, Saxby gave a little bit about my background. I was the co-founder of the company Nextel, then was involved in venture capital. What he doesn't tell is actually how I got started in business. And I say this with some trepidation. Saxby said to you all as students, one of the opportunities you'll have going forward is to get involved in politics, get involved in public service, absolutely important. But equally important, and this is something that with all of these, your professors and others here sometimes is not the message you hear enough. At this moment in life, you shouldn't also be afraid to fail. The most important lessons I've learned in my life have come from failure. Saxby mentioned when I first got out of law school, I decided I would go into business. I did move to Atlanta for a while. I quickly learned as a kind of a guy who'd grown up in the Midwest, lived in New England, gone to college in D.C., hadn't actually moved to Virginia at the point. I quickly found my way into figuring out how to become a Georgian. You know, this was, I was a new guy here. It was the days when Herschel Walker was at the university, and I always knew no matter what happened Monday morning, I could start any conversation with, how about them dogs? So I decided I would go into business. I will always remember it. Got out of law school, gone to Harvard, chose not to practice law, and recall my first business venture. Took my life savings, $5,000, invested them in a little energy startup company. Went to work for that company. And in 6 weeks, I helped that company go totally broke. Then went into real estate. That's what I was doing here in Atlanta. Took me 6 months to fail at real estate. So at the ripe old age of 25, I was flat broke, student loans coming due, living out of the back seat of my car, but a remarkable thing happened, kind of only in America. I got a third chance. There was this brand new industry started, and I got exposed to it in Atlanta, called cell phones. And I remember going to all of my law school classmates who were all practicing at these big prestigious law firms, and all went to them and said, you know, there's this new idea out there. You know, you ought to try it. It's cell phones, car telephones. They all looked at me uniformly and they said, Warner, you are so crazy. Go get a real job. Who's going to want a car phone? They're still practicing law. But if the first thing I think you need to understand is, you know, in a society like America, particularly as we all get enormous gifts, and we all have a gift if you're able to attend a university, the quality of the University of Georgia. You know, you have your parents, your professors, everyone saying, oh my gosh, if I don't get to law school or grad school or don't get that first job right out of college, you know, my life's a failure. Success, success, success. Yes, success will come, but you know, I can tell you, I have learned as much from failure, and I would not have had the success I had in business if I hadn't failed at first. Second point is that you can never do it alone. You know, after I started Nextel and then started a venture capital initiative, I've invested in more than 75 different businesses. I've reviewed over 1,000 business plans. And one of the things that very quickly has come, at least true to me, is I will take a good management team over a good idea any day of the week. And too often, particularly younger folks, think, you know, I'm going to go start a business. I'm going to own, you know, I want to be an entrepreneur. There is no such thing as a successful entrepreneur that's done it on their own. You know, everybody thinks about Bill Gates when he started Microsoft. Bill Gates had a partner in Paul Allen. Steve Jobs had a series of partners when he started at Apple. You know, Sergey and Alan were partners at Google. You know, no matter what your strength is, you will be stronger going forward particularly if you go down the business route, you go down the political route, if you find partnerships. One of the reasons why Saxby and I've had some success around our efforts, and I always do think it's curious that any time in Washington people of different parties actually work together, you're immediately called a gang member. I'm not sure how that happens. But one of the reasons why we have been able to build some of this coalition, the so-called Gang of Six, which in reality was 46 senators and 100 members of the House, that second half of the sentence never really got ever repeated too often, was because he and I brought different skill sets to the table in terms of how we approach problems. So, you know, I absolutely hope that many of you will go out and, whether you want to become in public life or entrepreneurial life, but there is no such thing as someone who does it all on their own. Third point is just simply this, that, end of the day, you've also got to have a passion. Passion can actually trump reason at times. When Saxby made mention of the fact that I was governor in a state that was 2-to-1 Republican in terms of our General Assembly. We had a similar circumstance at a much smaller microcosm to what we're facing at our national level now in terms of an unsustainable budget deficit. I decided we were going to try to take that on and try to fix it. Across the board, every political pundit in the state said Warner's about to commit political hara-kiri by going out and trying to build the coalition that said after we had cut enough, we had to actually ask ourselves as Virginians, what do we want from state government? What are we willing to pay for? What kind of universities do we want? What kind of highway system do we want? What do we want to be? We built an enormously passionate campaign that ended up, at the end of the day, reversing a series of trends in a broad bipartisan way that, as Saxby mentioned, earned Virginia recognition for being best managed state, best state for business, and I say, not immodestly, best state for a lifetime of educational opportunity. And the reason was because there was a whole lot of folks who stopped being Democrats and stopped being Republicans and became Virginians during this battle. And in many, many ways, that's what Saxby and I are trying to do and have been trying to do, not always successfully, let me assure you. You read the political press about the Gang of Six and they say, well, they never got a plan through. Well, we're not done. That debt that was $14 trillion when we started is now at $17 trillion. You want to get depressed, each of you students, each night when you go to sleep and you wake up the next morning, we've added $3 billion to that debt. And guess who's going to pay it? You guys. So this issue that Saxby and I are passionate about, and a host of others, we will get done. And sometimes at the price of taking on not just the so-called opponents, but candidly, sometimes the powers that be within each of our existing parties. One of the things that is I don't think people realize at times is that we have the ideological divides, and then we have the party of the status quo that just doesn't like to rock the boat too much. One of the things that Saxby Chambliss has been willing to do at a stage in his career when, the smarter thing, the safer thing, the more politically expedient thing would have been to simply, all right, he's in a bunch of good positions, let's just ride this out. He chose not to because he has a passion about this country, he has a passion about Georgia, and he has a passion about getting our country back on the right path. So my hope is, if you take nothing else away, remember, don't be afraid to fail. You can't do it alone. And passion will trump no matter what the odds are if you're willing to stay committed. With that as a starting point, I want to now bring the much more senior senator from Georgia back up here and open the stage to questions of any type. I mean, Saxby's, in the last 2 years, he's not running for anything, so he'll tell you the truth. I don't know for sure what I'm going to do, so I'll give you a half answer, or at least 3/4 answer. But I want to again thank Keith, and I want to thank all the folks from the University of Georgia for having us. And again, how about them dogs? Fire away.
Senators, my name is Luke Pipkin. I'm a student at the Institute for Leadership Advancement. In our leadership classes, we've learned about values-based leadership and the importance of bringing your personal values to the workplace. What is one value that you hold that affects the way that you lead?
I'm going to start you. I think this is going to sound a little funny, and I'm not sure it falls in a value in the kind of traditional sense as we think from kind of religious teachings or even philosophical teachings, but one of the things that guides me, at least in my public service career is that facts matter. You know, we can debate things, principles left and right and stuff, but at some point you got to go back to the data. At some point you got to go back to facts. You know, one of the things that just blows my mind is, you know, in today's America, you can turn on Fox News and MSNBC and see totally alternative, different realities. And I think healthy political debate based upon ideological differences, you know, is a healthy part of our process. But what we shouldn't be able to debate is the kind of underlying factual basis that we have. Let me cite one case in point that on the more kind of on my side of the aisle. And you know, this may be again an area where Sax and I disagree, because we have a slew of stuff we disagree with, I can assure you. But I, you know, fundamentally believe that one of the challenges we face as a nation, as a world, is, you know, the challenges around climate change. And, you know, I see the overriding abundance of science that takes place. And I was with one of my Democratic colleagues the other day who was, you know, bemoaning, you know, some of our Republicans' opposition to the science around climate change. And then he immediately transferred into, and you know, and at the same time, we got to make sure that we protect Social Security and Medicare forever. And what kind of made me mad was, you know, you can deny the science around around climate change, but at the same time, you can still, in this kind of ways, then deny the math around some of our entitlement programs. You know, Medicare and Social Security are the two most successful social initiatives in America in the last 100 years. Social Security is probably the most important social insurance program ever put forward. It is a great initiative that needs to be preserved. But anybody that denies the math that when I was a kid, there were 16 people working for every one person in retirement, and today there are 3 people working for every one person in retirement, knows that the basic math that started that program doesn't work anymore. So I do think facts. I'll just add one last point on this because I can get going on these in great detail. This is a very smart, intelligent university crowd. I'm going to give you your first quiz question. Who was the guy who originally set 65 as retirement age? Come on, this is a university group. Nobody got an answer? FDR, wrong. That's the answer that most people assume. The original person who set 65 as retirement age, where a government would give you a check, was Bismarck when he was head of Germany in the 1870s, and the reason he set 65 was because average life expectancy was mid-50s. Perfect politician promise, we're going to give you a check if you outlive the actuarial tables for 10 years. You know, when Roosevelt set 65 as retirement age, life expectancy was 62. Today in America, we're blessed that life expectancy is 80, and if you're a healthy woman at age 20, it's 100. Again, that is something that we should celebrate, the enormous success we've had in the healthcare field, but it does, again, come back to the fact that some of the math doesn't work. So one of the values that has guided me is facts do matter.